Pokémon Sun and Moon. Bizarre games to talk about, because they definitely stick out from the pack. They're about as different and experimental as a mainline Pokémon experience can be. These games brought a whole new approach to the region map, the story, the gym formula, and so many things in between. They are loved and loathed. They are free yet restrictive at the same time. So today, I want to go back and take a retrospective look at the original Gen 7 mainline experience. Strap yourselves in, and let's rock back up on the shores of the Alola region. So, as we punch into Pokémon Sun and Moon, we're greeted by the Professor in this region, Professor Kukui. And already, this is a vastly different vibe to the regular Pokémon experience. These games instantly transport you to summer. That's how I feel anyway. It actually felt kind of weird doing the playthrough for this video in January, because this is a very summer holidays kind of game for me. It's always been the game I play out in the garden with the sun shining and sipping on a milkshake. As I speak these words, it looks like this outside. Although I do live in the UK, so you could tell someone this picture was taken in July and they'd be like, yep, checks out. As the game throws us in, we are thrust into maybe the longest tutorial section in the entire franchise. I want to say Scarlet and Violet give it a run for its money, but this feels longer to me. The first couple of hours of play are a conveyor belt of cutscenes, fade to blacks, characters stopping you for more dialogue every 12 steps. There is one hell of a prologue section to this game. It just seems very intentionally designed with first-time players in mind. And I can kind of see why. These games were released during the 20th anniversary of the Pokémon franchise, so every 10 years we are hitting a point where a whole new generation of kids are becoming aware of Pokémon, and becoming fans of the series, and playing the games. I think it's still very overkill though. Kind of ironic that a region like Alola, which exudes this relaxed, laid-back culture, has such a stressful and frustrating pacing to start off with. Sun and Moon keep you on a very tight leash during your first couple of hours. Like many other games, Pokemon or not, it doesn't feel crazy bad during your first playthrough, because it's your first ever playthrough. Everything is new and novel to you. You don't notice the slog you're in. Every replay you do after that first playthrough though, gets more and more frustrating. And that sucks, because this is a game that has such a bright atmosphere to it. It's supposed to be cheery and fun. Like I said, it seems to have been carved out with new players in mind. It wouldn't surprise me though, if this constraining opening section turned a lot of players off before their adventure even started. Which is a shame, because amongst this slog of an early game though, is a bunch of enjoyable stuff. We meet plenty of colourful characters, the starters are enticing, and the region gives off a really exciting energy. That region is Alola. It is modelled after the US state of Hawaii, very heavily so. I feel like this is the hardest a Pokemon game has ever leaned into the culture and the real world location they're basing their games on. And it makes Alola very distinct from other Pokemon regions. The island culture gives Sun and Moon a unique rhythm we hadn't seen before. There are 4 main islands that we travel across throughout our journey, and each one brings something unique to the table. And I'm very glad that we work our way across each one in its entirety, and don't bounce between them constantly. That would have been really disorienting. And I really like how dense the map of Alola is. Everything's very compact. The towns and routes all have these small details crammed into a pretty small space. It is really unfortunate though that there's something that stops you from appreciating all of this as much as you could have. And that is the camera. We weren't at the point of getting a 360 camera at this point. That's fine, that's not what I'm prodding at here. In many areas of the game, the fixed camera would suddenly jump up to a very bizarre angle that partly or sometimes even completely hides the environment around you. And it's such a shame because the environments are great in Sun and Moon. I want to look at them. I like Alola a lot. I think if I were to point to one Pokemon region that would genuinely look gorgeous as an open world, without having to do pretty much anything to it, Alola would be that region. An open world probably would make it look small, because as I mentioned before, everything is pretty compact here, but it's such a rich Pokemon region, and it feels alive as well. It most importantly feels alive without you in it. This world isn't moving around me, I'm moving through it. The Alola region in isolation is easily one of my favourites. The soundtrack definitely helps with that. Alola's OST is very warm, that's a given I guess. But yeah, there's a playfulness to Sun and Moon's game music that encapsulates the tone Game Freak was going for here. Very tropical, quite a lot of emphasis on the percussion side of things, but it definitely gets mysterious and atmospheric when it needs to as well. Alola has a lot of mythical lore to it, with the Island Guardians and numerous altars and historic landmarks. The soundtrack can flip quite suddenly to let you know you've just entered an area with a lot of cultural and/or historical weight to it. I'm one of those people who can be prone to playing Pokemon games on mute during secondary playthroughs while I have something on in the background, but I really try not to with the Alola games. They lose something with the volume turned down for sure. I rarely have bad things to say about Pokemon game soundtracks, because it's one area that seems pretty consistently good. No exception here. The Pokédex is where the shakeup continues. Some of the most wild and bizarre designs come from Generation 7. I'd say it's the generation of Pokemon where the Pokemon look least like Pokemon. The Alola Pokédex is like this Technicolor fever dream. You either love it or you hate it. I kinda lean more to the hate side. Hate is a very strong word though, obviously. A lot of these designs just aren't for me, including my absolute least favourite Pokemon in the whole world. Stay away from me. Alola did give us Torracat and Rockruff though, so I have to thank Generation 7 for them. Alola was also the very beginning of the phenomenon that is regional variants. That all started right here. And I still think Alola is the region to beat when it comes to these new variations on older Pokemon. These variants went hard, and they chose some of the very best Kanto Pokemon to give them to, so they had to get it right. Oh yeah, they were just given to Kanto Pokemon. Sun and Moon were released during the 20th anniversary year of Pokemon. It was this big celebration, and so Kanto being Kanto got a big spotlight. And I'm not sure if it was originally intended to be something that carried on into the following generations, but I'm glad that it did, because regional variants are such a cool way of putting a new twist on older Pokemon. Sometimes it can make you really like a Pokemon you weren't so keen on before. My favourite from Alola has to be Alolan Marowak. This guy is intense. Let me know yours in the comments. We also got a really weird take on legendary Pokemon for this generation. These things are called Ultra Beasts, and I really didn't like them at first, because I thought they just looked more like Digimon than Pokemon. But that was actually before I played the games though, before I learned that they're literally meant to look off and weird, because these Pokemon are from completely different dimensions. They are alien Pokemon. I gotta say though, I always loved Celesteela, and that's probably the most Digimon looking one of the lot. I'm a walking contradiction sometimes. It's a funny bunch in the Alola Pokédex. Like I said, you probably either love it or hate it, but you can't argue that it isn't bold. Story time. Pokémon Sun and Moon were the most ambitious games since Black and White, I want to say. I think X and Y, despite introducing Mega Evolution, were kind of tame in the story department. Sun and Moon came out guns blazing. Right off the bat, we're thrown into a cutscene where a young girl is frantically running through some sort of greenhouse-looking place with a strange little Pokemon shuffling around in her bag. She gets cornered by some workers, and that strange little Pokemon teleports them both away. Instant hook, I like it. 3 months later, our character moves to the region, and we end up saving the girl's Pokemon from a bunch of Spearow after crossing paths. Is that a callback to the Ash Ketchum Spearow thing from the first anime episode? Another anniversary thing? I don't know, could be a coincidence. This is Lily, and she does not want us to tell anyone about this mysterious Pokemon she has, which sets an ominous tone nice and early. The Pokemon is called Cosmog, but Lily has nicknamed it Nebby. The narrative of Pokemon Sun and Moon largely centers around this woman here, Lusamine. So she heads up an organization called the Aether Foundation, an organization created to care for sick and injured Pokemon. On the surface, she comes across as a very elegant, charismatic character. It becomes apparent as we progress through the game though, that Lusamine is not the most stable human being. She has started developing an unhealthy obsession with Ultra Beasts. those Pokemon from other dimensions we mentioned earlier. She's fixated on catching and preserving them. She is also very emotionally abusive towards her children, one of which is Lily, and the other is called Gladion, as well as the staff of the Aether Foundation. All this to further her own goals. Lusamine wants to use Cosmog to open a wormhole to reach the world of these Ultra Beasts, and that's why Lily was escaping with it at the beginning of the game. She does ultimately succeed though, and reaching a fully unhinged state, even merges with one of the Ultra Beasts, leaving it to us, the player, to put a stop to her, which we do with the help of the Box Legendary, which turns out to be an evolution of Nebby, the first Box Legendaries to be the end of an evolution line. A pretty crazy and frantic story. It's got a strong emotional spine with the fractured relationship between Lusamine and her children. Also, the way this sunny paradise of a region is juxtaposed with this sci-fi horror type story arc. It hits you like a ton of bricks when that tonal shift happens halfway through the game. It's such an interesting angle to take as well, because the conflict here is driven by dysfunction rather than a desire for domination. Lusamine doesn't want to take over the region or anything, she's just mentally unwell. I probably should mention that she did lose her husband to one of these ultra wormholes, so it wasn't for no reason. I think the story is let down by the sheer amount of dialogue. That's an overarching problem throughout Sun and Moon, but it's very easy to lose details when you're pushing through so much text without something visual keeping your attention. Because we are playing a game here. You can make the argument that, oh, it's just reading, why are you so incapable of reading? Like, yeah, I love reading, but when I want to read large bodies of text at once, I pick up a book. I don't pick up a video RPG. So that's why it loses some people, I think. It's a good, nuanced, hard-hitting story though, I think. I'd love to hear anything you guys have to say on it as well. Alongside this, we do also have a regular-ish Pokemon playthrough structure. But perhaps the bravest move Game Freak has ever made in mainline Pokemon was the decision to remove gyms from the Generation 7 games. No gyms in the Alola region. Instead, we have something in their place called Island Trials, where you complete some sort of challenge, followed by a battle against a powerful boss Pokemon, or Totem Pokemon as they're called, that is also infused with this region's battle gimmick. We'll come to that in a little bit. It's clever because when you look at it closely, it is kind of just gym battles, just framed a bit differently. You could take the Pokemon you battle during these trials and throw them together into a gym leader team, but it's a repositioning that makes so much sense in the context of the Alola region, and the culture within it. Thematically, they're really cool. They present a genuine challenge, and a huge chunk of that challenge actually comes from the ally Pokemon these Totem Pokemon can call upon. You're in a 2-on-1 situation, and a lot of these allies have moves and abilities that make things a lot harder. There's one thing that makes them kind of anticlimactic though. You can knock the Totem Pokemon out, but still be left battling the ally Pokemon. That's kind of weird to me, because you've beaten the big boss. That should be the end of the battle really, but it's not. You have to sweep up the scraps as well. And yeah, it just kind of takes you out of the experience a little bit. Overall though, I like the vision. I like the idea of switching things up. I would absolutely be down for something like this again. After defeating the trials on each island, you then go up against the kahuna of that island in a grand trial. This is basically just a gym leader battle, but it helps segment your playthrough with little markers of completion for each island you travel across. These trials are a very unique thing to Alola. It would be very hard to implement anywhere else, I think. But they saw the opportunity here and took it, and that's pretty cool. I do wonder if we will see something like this again someday. Something else that's very unique in Pokémon Sun and Moon is the Evil Team. I have a whole video on Team Skull, I'll link that in the pinned comment, because they really are so different. Generation 7 was where evil teams stopped being purely evil. There are layers to them now. Team Skull is a team of losers. They're a very deliberate subversion, I think. They're a bunch of outcast kids who failed their island challenges, and now feel disillusioned because the island challenge is everything in Alola. There's such a huge emphasis put on it. It's basically a rite of passage to complete it for any young trainer. At first, Team Skull genuinely feel like comic relief characters. They're goofy and clearly trying to act tough when they obviously aren't, just going around and causing mild trouble for the pure sake of it. But underneath that, there's a genuine movement. Team Skull wants to disrupt the status quo of Alola. They want systemic change so that there's a future for Pokemon trainers outside of just beating the Island Challenge. A bunch of lost kids fighting for purpose. And they sort of find a purpose in banding together against the powers above. They have loose leadership in characters like Plumeria and the more prominent Guzma, but otherwise they're pretty scattered. Guzma gets himself in a real tangle when he's coaxed into working for Lusamine with her whole nefarious plan, so he gets some overlap with Team Skull and the Aether Foundation too, as well as Gladion being a member. But he's only really a member by definition and not by cause. He's sort of using them, you could argue, for his own mission. Really interesting. I'd recommend watching my video on Team Skull because I go into it all there. I like them. I think if you're gonna have a more nuanced antagonist team, this is how you do it. Team Yell in Sword and Shield were a decent, but also kinda disappointing follow-up on that idea. Didn't quite hit those same high notes. Team Skull makes perfect sense as a team that has a good, relatable story, while also maintaining a reason to be antagonistic and fight the protagonist at the same time. The Rival. Gosh, there are a lot of characters in Sun and Moon. Hau is our counterpart in these games, and he is as much of an anti-rival as we're ever going to get in Pokemon games. He's cheerful, supportive, and does not have a competitive bone in his body. Through talking to a lot of people about Hau, the sentiment on him seems very split. He's either charming or annoying depending on who you ask. He does start taking battling a little more seriously as the game gets to its later stages, but this guy's running on pure vibes. He's just running around high on life, which you could look at and be like, what's to actually dislike here? I like my rivals to be arseholes, okay? Thankfully, Gladion does sort of step into that role somewhat. He acts as a decent secondary rival to provide that bit of extra friction I think every Pokemon game needs. Rivals have obviously changed over the years. I like the more recent concept of having multiple rivals, where one is cheerful and friendly, and the other is kind of a jerk. That's a good best of both worlds situation. I hope games go a little deeper on that in the future. I want a rival that fully betrays us or something, you know? Something really shocking. We'll see. After all this craziness, we still have an Elite Four to beat. The Pokemon League in Sun and Moon is newly founded. If we win, we become the first ever champion of Alola. We are a pioneer of the Pokemon League here. That's kinda cool. As for the Elite Four themselves, they're made up of 3 of the Island Kahunas we've already met and battled before. Apart from Acerola, I can't remember battling her in the base game. And then Kahili, who is completely new. Never seen her before this. And that immediately makes her stand out. That and the fact that she's also a professional golfer. It's like they couldn't decide on a 4th Elite Four member, so they were like, let's just throw a quick character together and toss them in. Kinda worked though. I remembered her enough to make a whole point about it. Then, as we take the throne atop the Pokemon League structure, we assume we've finished the job, because this is the first Pokemon League. There is no sitting champion to beat. Oh wait, yes there is. Professor Kukui rocks up and says we need to have one last battle against him to claim the crown. Not too sure about that one, but it's a cool final battle to have in the game, against the Professor of the region. And him confirming your victory and having this little speech at the end makes your championship win feel a bit like a graduation. I don't know if anyone else got that vibe. So it's a shake-up in theory, but in practice, a pretty standard Elite Four and champion battle to finish things up. Let's talk a little bit more about the features and mechanics then. The previous generation started battle gimmicks with Mega Evolution. It had people wondering if that was going to be a permanent thing going forward. And Mega Evolution did find itself in this game, just in the post-game. But a brand new battle gimmick was introduced in Pokémon Sun and Moon, Z-moves. They're probably the least talked about gimmick nowadays, because it's the least grandiose one. There's no physical transformation involved here, it's just a stronger move that you can use once per battle. It's a very fleeting little boost. Make sure you don't waste it on Mimikyu's disguise like I've been known to do in previous playthroughs, because I'm an idiot. But yeah, they work in a similar way to Mega Stones with Mega Evolution. You give your Pokemon a Z Crystal to hold, which can be any type, although there are a few crystals that are specific to a particular Pokemon, and your Pokemon gains the ability to use that type's Z-move, as long as they have a move of that type already learned. Not flashy, but it can come in clutch in places, and it's really hype when it does. HMs also met their end in Generation 7, replaced by Ride Pokemon. Over the course of your adventure, you will acquire a bunch of Pokemon you can call upon at any time to navigate the various terrains in basically the same way HMs used to. I've always gone on record saying I'm not a fan of Ride Pokemon. I think it's kinda bizarre to be able to use Pokemon you don't actually have, but at the same time, screw HMs. It's a problem Game Freak has been trying to solve since taking the decision to ditch HMs. Some creative efforts so far. I still don't think they've quite nailed it though. Sword and Shield came closest in my opinion. But that's the deal here. Smash Rocks on Tauros, Fly on Charizard, Smash Rocks on Water with Sharpedo. It's better than HMs at the end of the day. And then, gosh, there are a lot of features in Pokémon Sun and Moon. Festival Plaza clumps most of your communication features into one big hub. Kind of overwhelming, but it does make sense to put all this stuff in one place. The Rotom Dex made its debut in these games. You can't see it because I'm only recording the top screen, but on top of being your Pokédex device, it's constantly talking to you and telling you where to go next. It's a map, it's a camera, and much, much more. Pokemon games have a lot going on these days, so condensing a bunch of gadgets into one device is probably a smart move. There's other stuff dotted around in here too. I'll be honest, the main story takes so much out of me that I don't even touch half the extra stuff. I just don't need more stuff explaining to me. Point being, Sun and Moon are jam-packed, and they had to group things into clusters to make it less overwhelming. But it's all interesting stuff to dig into. Pokémon Sun and Moon were crazy ambitious. 20th anniversary of the franchise, a really big year for Pokémon. They took a real chance on this, and I think they pulled it off. A lot of people do still talk about the nightmarish amount of dialogue though, which is 10 times worse during replays of the games. I saw something somewhere, I can't remember where, but it stuck with me, that said, Pokémon Sun and Moon have aged better emotionally than they have mechanically. And I think that hits the nail right on the head. They're really great games to think about and remember, and Alola is a beautiful region and deserves to be admired. But it's a hard world to admire while you're traveling through it. I'd highly recommend having a little jaunt across the map after you finish the story. Just have a run around and you'll actually be able to enjoy the views and environments, because you won't be getting stopped every 10 seconds for another bout of dialogue. Pokémon Sun and Moon are not the most captivating Pokémon games. Not the smoothest, definitely not the fastest, but they could stake a claim to be the most heartfelt games the series has ever seen. And even with all their problems, I'm really glad Pokemon tried something this bold. But how about you guys? Do you have any burning thoughts on Pokemon Sun and Moon? If you do, drop them down in the comments. Please do drop a like while you're down there, it helps a lot. Subscribe for more Pokemon content. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.